On paper, the story was simple. A rock legend claimed by age, disease, and the cruel march of time. His death certificate confirmed what most expected: an acute myocardial infarction, a massive heart attack with Parkinson's disease, autonomic dysfunction, and coronary artery disease listed as contributing factors. But behind the polished statements, the carefully crafted family tributes, and the clinical medical records lay a far darker and more complicated truth. Ozzy's final days were not serene or simple. They were a battlefield, not just of a failing body, but of a mind tormented by demons no doctor could cure. Hidden from the cameras, away from the fans, Ozzy Osbourne fought psychological wars that made his legendary struggles with addiction look tame in comparison. The man who had lived decades in the public eye spent his last weeks trapped in his own head, haunted by fears, doubts, regrets, and an aching sense of unworthiness. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part? His family watched helplessly as the man they loved was consumed not just by disease, but by the very demons he had been running from his entire life. These were the hidden struggles of Ozzy Osbourne's last days. The world was told Ozzy died peacefully. Sharon and his children released statements about a loving farewell, a life well lived, a family standing by him until the end. But those who were closest, the night nurses, the medical staff, the therapists, and spiritual counselors, revealed something far more heartbreaking. Ozzy's death was not the gentle slipping away of a satisfied man. It was a storm of psychological torment, a man at war with himself even in his final breath. For decades, Ozzy had been more than just a musician. He was a myth, a symbol, a legend, the Prince of Darkness, the madman of metal, the rock star who bit the head off a bat, who dove headfirst into chaos, who shocked the world with antics both terrifying and hilarious. But underneath that wild persona had always been a vulnerable man, a man who doubted himself, who wrestled with guilt, who never truly believed he was worthy of love. As death approached, those hidden wounds ripped open. The mask of Ozzy Osbourne began to crack, revealing John Michael Osbourne, a man terrified of being forgotten, terrified of being remembered for the wrong reasons, terrified of being loved, and terrified of being left behind. The first and perhaps most devastating struggle was something his private medical team called legacy anxiety disorder. This was no ordinary fear of death. It was an obsessive, crippling terror about how he would be remembered. According to medical notes, Ozzy would spend sleepless nights poring over biographies, demanding rewrites of family statements, and dictating endless corrections about his life. Every negative review, every harsh headline, every embarrassing story from the past became fuel for his obsession. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being reduced to a caricature. He couldn't bear the thought that decades of groundbreaking music might be overshadowed by the image of a man biting a bat's head or stumbling drunk on stage. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the psychiatrist who worked closely with the Osbourne family during those weeks, later described it as unprecedented in my 30 years of practice. Ozzy wasn't just worried, he was consumed. She revealed that he kept detailed lists of every person who had criticized him, every article that had mocked him, every review that had questioned his talent. Night after night, he would read them aloud, pacing the halls between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., muttering responses, rehearsing interviews he would never give, practicing speeches for shows that would never happen. These were his midnight sessions. A night nurse recalled, with tears in her eyes, how the frail rock star would shuffle through the corridors, whispering to invisible critics, defending himself, justifying his choices. He was rewriting his entire life story in his head, she said. It was heartbreaking. A man who had entertained millions now arguing with ghosts. Sharon, exhausted but devoted, often stayed awake with him during these episodes, trying to soothe him, trying to remind him of the love and admiration surrounding him. But Ozzy couldn't hear it. His mind was too loud, his guilt too heavy. The second hidden struggle was even darker. Medical professionals called it corporeal dysphoria, a profound disconnection and disgust with his physical body. Ozzy had spent his life as a force of energy, a tornado on stage, a performer whose very presence could electrify tens of thousands. But as Parkinson's ravaged his body, he no longer recognized himself. Looking in the mirror became unbearable. "This isn't me," he would say. "This broken thing isn't Ozzy Osbourne." He began covering mirrors in his home. He refused photographs. He grew violent when family members tried to capture memories. He clung to the clothes of his performing days, wearing outfits that no longer fit, desperate to preserve the illusion of the man he once was. Maria Santos, a personal care assistant who worked with the family, revealed something chilling. Ozzy had even tried to hire actors to stand in for him during family interactions. He wanted someone who looked like the old Ozzy to laugh with his grandchildren, to talk to his kids, while he hid in the shadows, too ashamed of his own decline. Though his doctors stopped this plan from moving forward, the very fact he considered it showed how deep his self-loathing ran. He withdrew from family meals, convinced that his struggles with eating would disgust them. He stopped hugging his grandchildren, afraid his frailty would frighten them. In the end, he wasn't starving because he lacked appetite. He was starving because of shame. For over 50 years, Ozzy had lived in the skin of Ozzy Osbourne. But in his final weeks, that identity became a prison. Medical experts called it performance anxiety paralysis. Even in private, even with family, Ozzy felt compelled to perform, to make jokes about death, to entertain, to wear the mask of the Prince of Darkness, even as it crushed the man underneath. A family friend recalled, "We'd be talking about his funeral, about the saddest things imaginable, and he'd crack a joke. But you could see it hurt him. He just didn't know how to take off the mask anymore." His therapist later described it as emotional exhaustion syndrome. He burned through what little energy he had left trying to entertain his death rather than experience it. He admitted in one recorded session, "I don't know how to be real anymore. Everyone expects Ozzy, but I'm just a man who's scared and sad and grateful. I don't remember how to be that without turning it into a show." But perhaps the most heartbreaking of all was his obsession with protecting his family. He was terrified his legacy would ruin them. Ozzy believed that being an Osbourne was a curse. He worried his children and grandchildren would forever be judged by his scandals, his controversies, his reputation as the madman. In his final weeks, he researched legal name changes for his kids, relocation plans to escape the spotlight, and even adoption agencies, asking if his adult children could be formally adopted by other families to free them of the Osbourne shadow. He met with lawyers to try to restructure his estate so his wealth could support his family without his name being attached. Anonymous trust funds, hidden charities, anything to erase the connection. But his family didn't want erasure. They wanted him. Yet Ozzy couldn't see it. Music had always been his salvation, but in his final weeks, it became his tormentor. He could no longer listen to his own songs without spiraling into grief. His younger voice, powerful, strong, eternal, mocked his frail body. Silence wasn't an option either. In silence, his demons screamed louder. His family tried playing other music, but everything hurt. Even nature sounds triggered unexpected pain. So Ozzy wore noise-canceling headphones, isolating himself from the world. The man who had once filled stadiums with sound now sat in silence, cut off from the very thing that had defined his existence. When he tried to sing along, his voice cracked. Weak, nothing like the sound that had made him immortal. In those moments, rage consumed him. He would scream, cry, and spiral into despair, his last and greatest coping mechanism gone. Even as he suffered, Ozzy was tormented by guilt. He hated being a burden. He apologized endlessly to nurses. He thanked staff obsessively for the smallest tasks. He even pretended to feel better than he was, just to ease Sharon's mind. He refused painkillers at times, terrified they would worry about him becoming addicted again. He insisted on trying tasks his body couldn't handle, just to spare others. He was trying to take care of everyone who was taking care of him, Dr. James Patterson later explained. But this guilt only worsened his stress, and doctors believe it directly contributed to the heart attack that claimed his life. For decades, Ozzy built his career on dark imagery: death, demons, the end of life. But when death truly came for him, he felt trapped by his own mythology. He believed he had to die like Ozzy. He scripted last words. He planned symbolic gestures. He tried to choreograph his own death as if it were another performance. But death cannot be staged. His efforts exhausted him and robbed him of precious, genuine moments with his family. Worse still was his forgiveness paralysis. He kept obsessive lists of mistakes, people he thought he had wronged, things he regretted. He wrote apology letters for trivial moments decades old. He called people from his past begging for forgiveness for things they didn't even remember. He could not forgive himself, and so he could not accept forgiveness from others. In his last days, reality itself fractured. Some mornings he would wake up believing he was 25, late for a Sabbath gig. Hours later, he would remember he was 76 and dying. His family never knew which Ozzy they would get: the wild young rebel, the global superstar, the weary addict, or the dying grandfather. Conversations had to be repeated. Memories couldn't form. Time itself betrayed him. And finally, the cruelest struggle of all. Ozzy couldn't accept love. When his family gathered around him, when they expressed their devotion, when they told him how proud they were, he deflected. He redirected. He sabotaged the moment. He felt unworthy. He literally couldn't tolerate being loved without simultaneously being punished. Dr. Martinez later revealed, the man who gave love so freely through his music, who inspired millions, couldn't let himself receive it in return. And then came July 22nd. That morning began like so many others. Ozzy pacing, consumed with legacy anxiety, reviewing old clippings, muttering about his reputation. The strain was too much. At 11:47 a.m., his heart gave out, a fatal heart attack. His final words were not the poetic farewell Sharon and the children had hoped for. They were not the scripted lines he had rehearsed in his midnight sessions. They were an anguished whisper. "I'm sorry I wasn't good enough." The air ambulance rushed him to Harefield Hospital, but nothing could undo the damage. Decades of self-doubt and weeks of psychological torment had broken the heart that drugs, alcohol, and excess had somehow spared. And yet, even in his final battles, there were moments, brief, fragile moments, of grace. Times when he let his guard down, when he accepted love without resistance, when he was simply John Michael Osbourne, husband, father, grandfather. In those flashes, his family saw peace. They saw the man behind the myth. Ozzy Osbourne's final days were not the fairy tale ending of a rock legend. They were messy, painful, tormented, but they were real. And in that reality, there is perhaps a greater lesson than in the myth of the Prince of Darkness, that even the greatest among us are human, that success, fame, and adoration cannot silence the quiet voice of doubt, that legends too can feel unworthy of love. In the end, Ozzy's last battle wasn't with Parkinson's or with death itself, it was with himself. And though his final words were an apology, his legacy is anything but failure. Because in those rare, fleeting moments, when he dropped the mask, when he let the love in, he showed us the most human, vulnerable side of the Prince of Darkness. And maybe that is how he should truly be remembered,